Welcome to the first episode of Unusual Archery, where I'm going to be bringing some light to some lesser known styles of archery from around the world. Today we're going to take a look at a style from the Northern Californian Native American tribes, often referred to as Ishi's method of shooting. Before I start, I'm going to be covering some sensitive topics in discussing ishi. My intention is only to give a little background information, as it does not feel right not to mention it. I am definitely no expert on this area of history, so this will be a very brief overview of why this style of shooting is known as ishi, and more importantly, who ishi was. I'd like to apologise in advance if I get any of the pronunciations wrong. Ishi literally means man in the Yana language. Yana was the language spoken by the Yahi tribe in Northern California, who were largely wiped out in the California genocide during the 19th century, which killed many of the Native Americans in the region. The Yahi culture meant they had to be introduced to new people. As such, they could not tell a new person their name without being introduced first. This brings us to Ishi, who was the last known survivor of the Yahi tribe. With no one to introduce him, he went by Ishi. It is recorded that when asked his name, he responded with, "I have none because there were no people to name me." Ishi was taken in by anthropologists at the University of California, where he was both studied and hired as a janitor. There is a lot more to this story, and I encourage anyone interested to go and do their own research into Ishi's life. I will list a few books based on him in the description of this video. The style of archery used by Ishi is very unique. We'll be starting by discussing the type of bow used. As was common with Native American tribes, the bows used were very short, usually under 45 inch, and made from a single piece of wood with a very short max draw, meaning draw lengths of under 26 inch, some even being as low as 18-19 inch. As the more observant among you will probably notice, I'm not using this type of bow for this video. I haven't been able to source one in my country. Instead, I'm using a junior horse bow with a short max draw, which seems to work fairly well as an analogue. I've also found shooting shorter adult size horse bows can work fairly well, such as the Kaya and the SKB Korean style bows. Looking at the bow hand first, the bow is held in the centre, much the same way as most traditional styles. The arrow is on the outside of the bow, same as thumb draw or Slavic draw. Here is where things start to get interesting though. The arrow sits below the thumb on top of the middle finger, with the index finger curled back out of the way. If done correctly, this means the arrow is leaving from the very centre of the bow. The bow arm is going to rotate outwards so that the bow is almost horizontal. I think this was probably to make the bow easier to shoot from thick brush. The string is pulled using a variation of thumb draw, so placing the thumb on the string to start. Using the middle finger to cover the thumb nail to strengthen the grip. The index finger then curls onto the string and pushes the nock of the arrow into the corner of the thumb knuckle. This is an incredibly strong lock and provides very good control of the arrow. The draw arm elbow is kept low. Often spare arrows could be held in the armpit. Now, I realise I've just made the majority of conventional archers panic with the idea of the elbow coming out of alignment. But due to the much shorter draw, it doesn't have the same negative effects on the biomechanics as bows with longer draw lengths. It's also worth mentioning here that bows did not achieve the same poundages as in Europe and Asia. The anchor point is in front of the chin, more or less in line with the front shoulder if standing side on to the target. In my practice, I have found using both a fixed and floating anchor point to be roughly equally effective. This technique seems to work best from a knelt position, allowing for a very broad, stable base. The technique feels functional from a stood position, but is definitely more awkward. The outward rotation of the bow arm makes maintaining balance in a standing position more challenging. Now, given this method of shooting breaks the vast majority of modern archery conventions, let's speculate on why. The kneeling stance and the bow being almost horizontal would indicate this style was designed to shoot when concealed, for example when hiding in brush, meaning it is well suited to hunting. The compact draw length is actually quite common in archery styles that don't descend from cultures that commonly had to deal with armour. Also, when discussing this as well as the majority of styles with a very short draw length, we are talking about much lighter poundage bows. It would be both unnecessary and impractical to use warbow style poundages with this technique. I have found that 30 to 40 pounds seems to feel about right for me. When trying my usual 50-pound draw weight, it feels just a little bit too heavy, but this will obviously vary between individuals and would have done in history. Use of a version of thumb draw I find very curious, as historically this was very uncommon in Western countries. I am reminded of a theory I once heard that a lost ship during the attempted Mongolian invasion of Japan washed up in North America, and that's why thumb draw shows up in some Native American tribes. Equally, it is entirely possible that the technique was developed organically in North America, as while it does use the thumb on the string, all the other elements of the technique are quite unique. Would this method of shooting work in warfare? As I stated above, it definitely lends itself to hunting. However, this does not mean it can't be dual purpose. It would be a very static form of archery, but English longbow has proven this can be very effective in combat. And while the lower poundage could potentially be an issue against heavily armoured targets, Native American tribes didn't generally come into heavy plate armour, and 30 to 50 pounds is more than adequate against an unarmoured target. Today, this is a relatively unknown style in the archery community, as with many of the shorter draw techniques. It's definitely a fun way to shoot, and I can see it being a great way to go around a field archery course. I find the style surprisingly easy to achieve consistency with, although I do find my arrows fly slightly higher than I would expect them to, so I definitely need more practice. Brings us to the end of the video. I hope you found this interesting. Please like and subscribe for more.